Hello and Happy New Year, Leadership Journey participants. Today, with my learning buddy Steve Smith, we're going to explore leadership principle number 59, which reads, emotionally intelligent leaders create an environment of trust and fairness by controlling their feelings and impulses. I personally couldn't agree with this more. I believe this maxim is supported by experts in the field, and I believe we've all probably felt this in some way. Today, Steve and I are going to break down this concept. I'm going to offer just a couple minutes and a few comments on some research I've done from some of my past and some resources I'm familiar with that'll kind of explore some of the academic support for this in the field. Steve will then talk a little bit about some observations, reflections in the real world that he's seen and felt. So let's get started. First off, Daniel Goleman, widely considered the father of EI, says a few things about this concept in a book, Working with Emotional Intelligence. He actually has a section titled Self-Control. Can you see that? Self-control right there. Keeping disruptive emotions and impulses in check. He says, quote, people with this competence manage their impulsive feelings, stay composed, positive, or unflappable, think clearly, and stay focused. Just a chapter or two later, he goes on to say, he ties back to this concept in a section called Trust and Selfless Collaboration. Can you see that? And lastly, he has another section that's called Trustworthiness and Conscientiousness. All of these, he argues, are moods and atmospheres set by a team, often influenced by a leader. Moving on, another expert in the field, Dr. Richard Boyatzis, by the way, one of my professors at Case Western, great guy, also comments this on a seminal work called Resonant Leadership. You'll see a foreword by Daniel Goleman. Isn't that interesting? He goes into some detail about PEA and NEA, positive emotional attractors, negative emotional attractors. These are basically the fact that emotions are contagious. We can put off a mood and we get it back. We can put off environments of trust or not. So in this, he says that in a section called Resonance or Dissonance, the leader's choice, he states that leaders, quote, their own emotions are powerful drivers of their people's moods, atmosphere, and ultimately performance. So it's not a stretch that by controlling emotions, leaders do indeed create an atmosphere of fairness and of trust. As a result, I believe we have a better chance at optimal performance. As we know from our studies, one of the core 5 principles is behavior is a function of our environment. So I think the academic experts in the world of EI actually support this principle number 59. Now, Steve Smith will talk about how he's observed this in some of his life. Thank you.
Hello, Steve Smith here. As Scott stated, we're talking about how emotionally intelligent leaders create an environment of trust and fairness by controlling their feelings and impulses. You heard Scott say through writings of Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis that there is a reality to this concept of emotionally intelligent leaders and the impact they have in the environment of trust and fairness. Just take a moment and reflect how you feel when you're dealing with an individual who lacks strong emotional intelligence. Remember, our behaviors are a function of us working within our environment. Principle number 10. Therefore, if you're working in an environment where the leadership lacks strong emotional intelligence, how do you react? Let's look at some real-world examples of leaders with strong emotional intelligence. I enjoy reflecting on strong leaders from various walks of life and endeavoring to better understand how they leverage their emotional intelligence to create an environment of trust and fairness. On November 19th, 1863, Abraham Lincoln delivered his Gettysburg Address. The address was actually a very short speech. It only consisted of 272 words and lasted a mere 2 minutes. But Abraham Lincoln brought his emotional intelligence to bear, and out of this short message, created an incredible environment of trust and fairness. We must remember, this address was delivered at a battlefield where there were 51,000 casualties and 7,000 deaths on both sides. Lincoln started the speech by emphasizing fairness, by saying this country is dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Henry Jacobs, who was born in Gettysburg and became an American religious educator, was standing in the front of the speaker's stand and wrote about the following about President Lincoln. Quote, "At first his voice sounded a little strained and high-pitched, as if he were trying to throw his voice to the outer edges of the crowd. He held in his right hand the manuscript he had brought from the White House. He emphasized the words of, by, and for the people. With a stiff yet sweeping bend of his hand, holding the manuscript rigidly in both hands, he then drew himself up to his immense height, and with his arms outstretched, as he impressively uttered the final words, 'shall not perish from the earth.'" Lincoln, with his strong emotional intelligence, rebuilt an environment of trust and fairness at a time when the country had hit a low point, where a civil war had pitted neighbor against neighbor. My second example of a leader with strong emotional intelligence is Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was an incredibly strong leader at a time when this country was struggling to overcome racial injustice. When Reverend King gave his historic "I Have a Dream" speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on August 28, 1963, he was delivered by a man with strong emotional intelligence who is building a legacy of trust and fairness. In one of his most famous quotes from his speech, he said, "So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It's a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out that true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." That all men are created equal? Doesn't that sound familiar? These are the same words spoken by Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg. Trust and fairness are built on the foundation that we're all created equal. My final example is another U.S. president, John F. Kennedy. JFK at his inauguration made one of the most famous and repeatable speeches of all time. He spoke of the need of all Americans to be active citizens and for all nations to work against the common enemies of tyranny, poverty, disease, and war. He rallied support from those who had voted for him and from those who hadn't, calling the people of the United States of America to, quote, "ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." With his strong emotional intelligence, JFK garnered trust and faith and fairness and asked the entire nation to participate. I hope you agree by looking at these three examples that emotionally intelligent leaders truly create an environment of trust and fairness by controlling their feelings and emotions. I'll leave you with one parting thought. All three of these great emotionally intelligent leaders have one other thing in common. They were all assassinated and taken from this world too soon. They were taken by the dark side of people not controlling their feelings and emotions, by those who don't feel they're living in an environment of trust and fairness. My hope is that we all strive to control our feelings and emotions so we too can be better leaders, building an environment of trust and fairness for everyone.